Hi, I'm Dave Smith. I'm the instructor for pre-calculus course. And if you're in my course, this is your first introduction. If you're not in my course, you might find that this video and company videos could be beneficial to you. Okay. Starting a pre-calculus course, excuse me, it's allergy season. Starting a pre-calculus course, we find that the majority of students that come into the course don't have the background that'll make it easy to get through pre-calculus. This is at this time largely due to COVID and also to various factors, national factors. They aren't local. This happens all over the country. People get through algebra courses without learning it as well as they really need to. Okay. In this course, we're going to try to deal with that by emphasizing graphs. Graphs and the ability to understand graphs is easier to remedy and quicker to remedy than algebra. And the graphs give us a tangible understanding of the functions that we're going to deal with in pre-calculus. Now, I mentioned functions. Pre-calculus is a study of functions. Hopefully, you've encountered the idea of a function in your prerequisite courses. Maybe not. We're also in a situation where people pretty much place themselves into courses, and a lot of pre-calculus students don't place themselves very accurately. Again, we're trying to still make these students as successful as possible. Give them a path, give everybody a path to mastering pre-calculus. This takes a considerable amount of work, but we're going to approach it so that we first understand some things about graphs that you probably don't understand because you've probably done too much of your graphing using technology. We want to be able to graph things by hand. This gives us a tangible connection to the graphs and gives us a tangible set of skills, and that's probably not a good phrase, but a set of skills that allow us to really kind of reach out and touch some of these important aspects of graphs that we then analyze algebraically. And in my course, the algebra demands will start out pretty modest and we'll develop them gradually, or at least you'll be given materials to help you develop gradually, because we can't start with pre-algebra and then work through algebra 1 and algebra 2 and teach a pre-calculus course. Okay, so people are going to have to do some remediation probably. We're going to try to make that as gentle as possible. Anyhow, again, excuse me. Been a couple of weeks since I did any talking to a class, and that probably loosens things up a little bit. I might cough a few times during the lecture. Totally healthy as far as I know. Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed. Okay, I hope you like this picture. You'll probably see it fairly often. It turns out that this picture is really good for keeping the camera focused on a blank board, so I use it quite a bit. First thing you're going to need, you're going to want to have a pencil and a piece of paper in front of you. It's not going to do you much good just to view these videos. You need to be active. You need to be writing things down. You need to do things. Often pause briefly, and you can pause your video and do what you're asked to do. Okay. That's the way you can keep yourself engaged. That's the way you carry as much as possible away from the time you spend watching the video. You're going to end up spending more time on the videos, but you're going to be focused and you're going to learn much more. Okay, so here we go. we want to have a piece of paper in front of you. So let's just say a piece of paper is. Now, the first thing you want to do is, excuse me, you want to sketch a line across the top of the page. Okay, so right now you should simply pause the video and sketch a line across near the top of the page, not right at the top, maybe about here. And well, hopefully you've done that. So how long does it take to sketch a line across the top of the paper if you have pencil and paper in hand? About 3/4 of a second. Okay. Now, I might be better drawing straight lines than you are. The secret to drawing a straight line is you start and you focus on the point you want to draw it to. You just keep looking at that point, and your hand is going to kind of spontaneously move you in that direction. All right, so we sketch a line, and then we want to sketch 2 points near the ends of the line, one of those points A and B. You should do that before you go on. You probably already have, you don't really need to pause. It doesn't take long to do that. Okay. Now that should have all taken you maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Okay. You should always be able to just draw a line across the page and label the points near the ends A and B. And we want to get the point halfway between A and B. Now it's a little tricky. Getting the halfway point. I just want to do this, and that should be pretty close to the halfway point. Now, is it close? I'll bet it's not all that close. Let's see, 15.5 centimeters. Oh man, it's pretty good. 15.5 centimeters from here to here, and 15 centimeters from here to here. So you want to do it quickly. You want to be able to quickly locate the midpoint, and you could just do it visually. You could say, okay, it's a little too far that way, maybe a little to the left. Okay, one way or another, you get the midpoint. Okay, so I'm going to label that M for midpoint. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing with the interval from A to M. I'm going to get the point halfway between A and M. And I'm going to label that MA, and halfway between M and B, and I'm going to label that. Ooh, I was too close to B. Okay, see how bad that was. You don't have to measure these, I'm just curious. Actually, it's a lot closer than I thought it was. It's just about right. 7.5 centimeters each way. Okay, so thought I made a mistake, but happened. All right, so there we have it. Well, now you see I've divided the interval from A to B into 4 equal sub-intervals. And again, just to demonstrate, and that's about close to 8 centimeters. It's about 7.7. That's about 7.5. That's about 7.5. So these intervals are a little wide. It's okay, close enough. And of course, the reason we're doing this is we want to be able to hand sketch a good graph. You can't sketch a good graph unless you have a good scale. And this is how I'm going to advise you to scale the graphs. So you might understand what I just said, maybe not, but you will soon. Okay. Okay, so now I've got 4 sub-intervals. I'm going to do the same thing to each of those sub-intervals that I did to the whole interval from A to B. That is, take the sub-interval from A to MA, and I'm going to cut that in half. And I'm not going to label it. I'm going to cut that in half, and I'm going to cut that in half. I'm going to use shorter little lines here, so I know where A and MA and M and MB and B are. Okay, so I did the same thing with all these intervals. And as long as it looks about right, it's probably going to be about right. I'm not going to measure them. But now I've divided the interval from A to B into 16 equal intervals. And they're nearly equal, probably not more than a 10% difference in the length of any, the lengths of any two. Actually, this one looks pretty wide. Okay, so I kind of screwed that one up, and maybe I want to correct it, or maybe I just want to be more careful. Now, you should be able to do this whole thing in 10 seconds, 20 at the most. Okay, you just slop it down and you subdivide it, keeping, taking some care, and you're going to get a reasonable depiction of the interval from A to B divided into 16 equal parts. Okay, well, what are we going to do with that? Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a numerical scale underneath the graph. I'm going to put -2 here, and I'm going to put 2 here. Okay, so if -2 is here at A and 2 is here at B, what number would we put in here for M? Well, M is halfway between -2 and 2. Well, go ahead and do this. What number do you put in for M? What number would you put in for MB? What number would you put in for MA? Well, halfway between -2 and 2 would be 0. Now, maybe you got that, maybe you didn't, but there it is. Hopefully you understand that. Okay. Now, what's halfway between 0 and 2? That would be your MB. That would be 1. What's halfway between -2 and 0? Well, that's MA, and halfway between -2 and 0 is -1. We could go on. Halfway between M and MB is here. If this is 0 and this is 1, what's halfway between 0 and 1? Well, it's 1/2. What's halfway between 0 and 1/2? Well, I'm going to let you think about that. I will say later, but you should probably stop and think what's halfway between 0 and 1/2. Okay. Now, a more obvious way to number these points would be from 0 to 16. Okay, now if we number from 0 to 16, what number from 0 to 16 would match up with -1? What number would match up with 0? What number would match up with 1/2? What number would match up with 1? Excuse me, what number would match up with 2? Stop and give that a little thought. Okay, well, hopefully you thought about that and you got a conclusion, and hopefully you said that this is 4, and this is 8, and this is 10, and this is 12, and this is 16. But let's see how you do that. If this is 0, then here's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, that makes this 4. Now I can mark in here, here's 1, 2, 3. I don't have room to write those numbers big, so I'm not even going to write them. I should know that if this is 0 and this is 4, this is 1, 2, and 3. It's not hard to see that, and especially if you look at it a few times. Okay. So what about 0? Well, we could count, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep. There's 8. Here's 9, and here's 10. Here's 11, and here's 12. And here's 13, 14, 15, 16. Better be 16, because that's what we did. Now we could number the rest of the points. That would be fine. We could certainly number 6 here, and 14 halfway between 12 and 16, halfway between 4 and 8, and then maybe we're going to label 2 here. There isn't really room to put the numbers in between these, but if you have this much, you really do know what the scale is. Okay, well, now we have 2 different scales on the interval from A to B. One scale, A stands for -2, B stands for 2, and the rest of the numbers follow from whatever numbers I put in these. I put 0 and 16, we see how that works. Let's try it with 0 and 1. Well, let's just start with what number goes here under 0, under M. Okay. What number would we put here? Think about that for a second. M. We'll do it as soon as I find a way to. Question mark without smarter. Okay, well, if this is 0 and this is 1, this is halfway between here and here. It's the midpoint between A and B. So that's going to be 1/2. Okay. Well, what number is going to go here below MA? Think. Hopefully you know. Okay, so this is 1/4, and I hope you're writing all this down. I hope you're writing it down before I tell you what the answer is, but if not, then just at least write it down and think about it. Okay. Now what's halfway between 0 and 1/4? In other words, what's halfway between A and MA on this scale? Halfway between 0 and 1/4 is what? It's 1/8. And then what's halfway between 0 and 1/8? Not a lot of room here, but I'm going to squeeze it in. Okay, well, that's 1/16. The 1/16 corresponds to this point. 1/8 halfway between A and MA. MA is 1/4 and so forth. Okay, well, we could fill in the rest of the numbers. Why does 1/16 make sense? It's because we took an interval from 0 to 1 and we divided it into 16 parts. So that's got to be 1/16. Okay. Another way to number this would be, and I don't have room to write these, but this would be 0, 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5/16, 6/16, 7/16, 8/16, 9/16, 10, and so forth. Okay. In other words, each of the numbers we have here, when we number this from 1 to 16, each divided by 16. I understand that. Okay. So the idea of, well, okay, should be clear. If this is 0 and this is 1, then this point would be 1/16. This would be 2/16, and of course 2/16 simplifies to 1/8, and then 3/16, and then 4/16, and 4/16 is the same as 1/4 or so. Now, one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to write these as decimal numbers. In other words, 1/16, 1/16 is a decimal number. It's 0.0625, but you probably don't know that off the top of your head. 1/8 is 0.125. Okay, and so we don't want to deal with those numbers. And we really want to keep a calculator out of our hands. Nothing here requires a calculator, nothing we've done. And very little of what we do with graphs is going to require a calculator until we start solving equations. Now, let's number the interval from -8 to 8. Go ahead, take a minute and actually do that. Okay, we go from -8 to 8. Now, how do we divide this up? Well, we can see that halfway between -8 and 8 has to be 0. Halfway between 0 and 8 would correspond to our MB, that would be 4. Halfway between -8 and 0 is -4. And then halfway between 0 and 4 is 2. Halfway between 4 and 8 is 6. Halfway between -4 and 0 is -2. Halfway between -8 and -4 is -6. So knowing that these points here, every other point could be -8, -6, -4, -2, 0, etc. We get a line. You get a scaling of this interval. Now I want to return to the idea of labeling numbers from -2 to 2. Remember, I asked what number should go here. Well, I'm going to start over. I'm going to do -2 here and 2 here. And I know halfway between -2 and 2 is 0. Halfway between 0 and 2 is 1. Halfway between -2 and 0 is -1. Halfway between 0 and 1 is 1/2. halfway between 1 and -1 and 0 is -1 half. So I know all this. Now I could also go halfway between 1 and 2, that'd be 1.5. Halfway between -2 and -1 be -1.5. And maybe write this as fractions, 3/2 and -3/2. Let's not worry about that. Let's just worry about the simplest fractions. Okay. So we have -1/2. What's halfway between 0 and 1/2? Hopefully you figure that out. But if not, here we got the interval from 0 to 1. It's split into 4 equal sum intervals. So this interval would be 1/4. And then this point would be 2/4. This point would be 3/4, and this point would be 4/4. Now 2/4 is 1/2, but we have 1/4 here. And 3/4 here. On this side, halfway between -1/2 and 0, what do you think that is? Write it down, pause, think about it. Now let's see if you're right. Well, that's -1/4. Now I've got -3/4 there. Actually, the most important numbers. Well, let me just do this one. We could fill in the rest of these numbers. But we're not going to bother. In fact, when we start doing graphs of our most fundamental functions, the only x values that we're going to actually use are well, we're going to use -2 and 2. We're going to cut that interval in half to give us 0. We'll cut this interval in half to give us 1. We'll cut this interval in half to give us -1. We'll cut this interval in half to give us 1/2. We'll cut this interval in half to give us -1/2. This is going to be what we call the standard domain. And if I could write the next letter instead of skipping one, we could have done over here. Standard domain for all the functions that we start with in this course. Now, you don't necessarily know what that means. You don't necessarily know what a domain is. That's coming up very shortly. So I'm just going to write it down. The standard domain is the set of numbers, -2 to 2, the set of numbers we get where we divide in half, divide in half, divide in half, divide in half, divide in half. Just these numbers. So it'd be here, 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 here. Oops, we don't go that far. We're not going to actually use 1/4 for our standard domain. It'll come up in the range of one of our functions, so if you know what domain and range are. I have a little preview, but don't worry if you don't know. We'll introduce that a little bit later. Okay. This is a standard domain that I use in my courses for the toolkit functions. Now, you know, I haven't told you what the toolkit functions are, but they're going to be near and dear to you. This is how we start the course with the toolkit functions. Before we can talk about the toolkit functions, we have to talk about how to construct an interval from -2 to 2. So we're saying we can start with any interval from A to B. We can chop up that interval by cutting it in half, cutting that in half, cutting that in half, and so forth. And we can label the points any way we want to, any way we need to. There's one way that's key to this course. It's the standard domain, which is this. It's not the key to the course, but it's something you're going to use again and again. So let me just illustrate quickly how we get the standard domain and illustrate what you need to be able to do in a minute or less, preferably in 10 seconds or less. You can time it. Okay, so here we go. Start with an interval with 2 points, A and B. Take the midpoint, call that M. Take this midpoint, call it MA. Take this midpoint, call it MB. Divide this interval in half, this interval in half, this interval in half, this interval in half. And I didn't even worry about making all 16 marks. Okay, this gives you your standard domain. Because here you got -2, here you've got 2, here you've got 0. Halfway between 0 and 2 is 1. Halfway between -2 and 0 is -1. Halfway between -1 and 0 is here. That's -1/2. Halfway between 0 and 1 is 1/2. We marked the points for 1/4 and -1/4. We didn't want it. So right there is our standard domain. You can think of that. It probably took me more like 20 seconds because I was talking. You can write it down pretty quickly. I wrote it down kind of sloppy. It's okay. Write it down kind of sloppy. I wasn't as careful in getting my midpoints. Okay, but I was reasonably careful. So that an interval from 0 to 1/2 is twice as long as the interval from 0 to 1/4. The interval from 0 to 1 is twice as long as the interval from 0 to 1/2. 0 to 2 is twice as long as 0 to 1. That's important. If you're off by a little bit, it's not a big deal, but sometimes you want to be really careful and make it really precise. Most of the time, you just slop it down. Learn to do it in 20 seconds or less. Learn to do this. You're going to be tested on it in the next class, if you're in my class. Quiz going up, it's not really a test. Yeah, there's something else I was going to say. But really, that's it. Now, yeah, I did say, I do want to say that these are the numbers we're going to use to evaluate our standard or our toolkit functions. Okay, so just as a preview, we would take these numbers of our toolkit functions as log as x squared. Okay, we can write down these numbers for our x values: -2, -1, -1/2, 0, 1/2, 1, 2, and we can write a y value, y equals x squared. You square -2, you get 4. Well, here are the squares. We'll talk about this more in detail. Make sure that you really understand what you're doing when you square these numbers, but there are the squares. And from that, we can sketch a pretty good graph of the toolkit function. And we get a fairly good parabola, but I'm not all that great at drawing these well. Okay. So if you understand, how to make tables, evaluate functions, you already know quite a bit of what we're going to be doing in some future videos. Okay, so that's it for right now. Just a little more bottom line. You don't have to know how to do this right now. I'm just showing you where it leads. Showing you something about why we're doing this is what you need to be able to do. And you should also be able to do this. I tell you what numbers for A, what numbers for B, you ought to be able to fill in scale. Okay. But most critically, be able to do this and be able to do it quickly and with reasonable accuracy. I would practice it.